Hey besties, Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds' obscene demands to Wayfair were actually caught on a recorded call. Yes, recorded. And these recordings are now confirmed as evidence in the case. Remember that whole mess around the film premiere? Blake allegedly ordering everyone to unfollow Baldoni, forcing him to walk his own red carpet, banning him from photos with his own cast, isolating him publicly. And now we know Ryan was running around Hollywood talking to WME agents, Sony execs, and anyone with power, allegedly using his influence to pressure Wayfair and Baldoni into compliance. Well, the receipts are here. Jamie Heath testified under oath that he recorded multiple phone calls, not just with WME, but also with Sony. And now that information is officially filed as an exhibit in court. This came out because Wayfair had to respond to Blake Lively's massive sanctions motion. She claimed they deleted evidence and asked the judge to punish Wayfair so severely that they wouldn't even be allowed to argue there was no smear campaign. Wayfair fired back with a 30-page breakdown and dozens of exhibits. And honestly, based on what's in their filing, her argument does not look strong. Wayfair basically argues they didn't delete evidence. Blake has mountains of documents she thinks prove her case, and they have evidence showing Blake ran the smear campaign against herself. And yes, they literally wrote that Blake's own choices created her downfall. Choosing to market alcohol, choosing to exclude Baldoni from the premiere, choosing to make explosive decisions on set, choosing to isolate him and control press narratives. Wayfair even points out that Blake herself previously told them the spike in online hate happened on August 6th, which is impossible to blame on Wayfair because the contractor she's accusing wasn't even hired yet. Then there's the bombshell. Jamie recorded the WME call. In his deposition, he confirms WME called to read him a letter from the Reynolds, a demand letter he describes as so unbelievable he hit record so he could save every word. This was tied to the infamous August 12th statement, the one where they wanted Wayfair and Baldoni to take the fall publicly and admit fault. So yes, the call where Blake and Ryan allegedly demanded they take responsibility, recorded. Then they ask about the Sony call, and he confirms he recorded that too. They believed they had a good relationship with Sony until suddenly it felt like Sony was shifting toward Blake, probably because Ryan's box office power carries weight. Studios follow money. Ryan's Deadpool franchise made him A-list, and Blake's status is largely tied to him and her proximity to extremely powerful friends. Wayfair's filing suggests Sony hung them out to dry. But here's the kicker. Sony didn't pay for this movie. Wayfair did. They paid for the book rights. They paid for the script development. They invested in the entire project for years before Sony even came on board. And then Blake and Ryan allegedly hijacked the whole premiere. Listen to Steve Sarawitz's sworn testimony. He says the team that funded the movie, including himself, was locked out of the premiere. Justin, Jamie, and the producers were relegated to a basement area, not allowed on the red carpet except for tiny pre-approved windows. Justin was banned from being photographed with his own cast. They were isolated from all publicity. Then he describes what Blake did after taking control. Fired Wayfair's editors, fired their composer, fired their assistant producer, removed Justin from the poster, removed his creative contributions from the final cut. Sony allowed Blake and Ryan to take over a film they did not fund. Wayfair paid the bills. Blake allegedly hijacked the creative control. Ryan allegedly used influence to pressure the studio, and Sony distributed a film that Wayfair no longer recognized as their own. This is what the filings say, and these recorded calls, once unsealed, could change everything. Sony wasn't paying for the production of the film. That $30 million came entirely from Wayfair and Steve. Sony's only job was distribution, meaning they were responsible for marketing and getting the movie into theaters. But because Sony was desperate for a hit, they overstepped that role and essentially allowed Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively to push out the very people who paid for the film. Sony let Blake fire editors, composers, and even producers, none of which was in their contract. Sony had no right to give her that kind of power, but they were in total chaos at the time. They just lost $71 million on 2 box office bombs. Several executives were fired or left the company, and leadership at the top of Sony changed completely. They needed this film to be a win, so they gambled on Blake and Ryan at Wayfair's expense. In any other industry, what happened would be considered fraud, coercion, or extortion. Wayfair spent $30 million of their own money, yet were shut out of the premiere entirely because Blake and Ryan hijacked the film. Ryan has done this before. He forced Tim Miller off Deadpool 2 because he wanted complete control over the script, and Tim has openly said the experience gave him PTSD. Blake has a similar track record. During the rhythm section, she fought producers so aggressively that the film was shelved for 2 years, eventually costing the studio $50 million. After that, she was considered box office poison. Yet Sony still forced Wayfair to hire her, and then let her take over. According to Wayfair's legal motion, during post-production, Blake wrestled control over editing, post-production, and marketing, repeatedly removing Baldoni's authority. She also demanded that his film buy credit be removed. And critically, Wayfair's evidence doesn't just come from their side, it comes from Sony's internal documents, Blake's communications, and testimony from Sony executives. Blake used threats to get her way. She made it clear that if they didn't meet her demands, she would refuse to participate in marketing, even though her contract required her to promote the film. Sony's own evidence confirms this. Baldoni testified that Blake told Sony to remove his directing credit, refused to appear with him, pressured the entire cast to unfollow him on social media, and ultimately got him banned from the premiere. He wasn't allowed on the red carpet, wasn't allowed to appear in any promotional materials, and Sony forced him and his guests into a separate basement screening room. WME and other agencies corroborated all of this. Blake also very publicly unfollowed Justin Baldoni on social media, and Colleen Hoover gave testimony about what Blake was telling people behind the scenes regarding the unfollow campaign. The PR disaster exploded on August 6th. Rumors were flooding the media, fueled by the fact that Blake unfollowed Baldoni and was trying to strip his film credit. Sony's documents confirm this too. And then came the final blow. Despite the story of It Ends With Us centering on domestic violence, Blake used her Betty Boo's alcohol products, including an It Ends With Buzz drink, to promote the film. The backlash was immediate, brutal, and widespread.
Given everything that's happened and the increasingly hostile behavior coming from Blake Lively's side, it makes sense why Wayfair and its team anticipated a wave of negative publicity. That's exactly why they brought in Melissa Nathan. And honestly, that's the purpose of this entire discussion, to explain why we're here today and why they didn't file a simple motion to dismiss at the start. If they had moved to dismiss early on, they wouldn't have gained access to any of the evidence that now exists. No discovery from Sony, none from WME, no depositions, nothing. By moving forward, they secured the documents, testimony, and recordings that now form the basis of the case. And this evidence is what needs to be shown publicly if people are ever going to understand what really happened. As of right now, Blake and Ryan's filings remain sealed. They have until December 19th after receiving an extension. The judge has already said he won't violate the public's right to transparency, and he won't rule on the summary judgment motions until everything relevant is unsealed, meaning we will get to see what's in these documents. They're just delaying the moment it becomes public. And the lengths they're going to in order to seal basic statements and routine discussions, completely out of the ordinary. For context, the Department of Justice has been fighting over the release of the Epstein documents for years, and even those contain more publicly accessible information than anything being hidden here. What's being sealed in this case appears far less confidential and far more about avoiding public backlash. All these filings, motions, and delays have one purpose: stalling the inevitable release of evidence. Now, will some of the evidence be unflattering to Wayfair or Justin? Absolutely. No one in the story is perfect, and some things said behind the scenes will rub people the wrong way. That happens in any real human environment, especially in one as heated as this. But the core issue, the main misconduct at the center, is not coming from Wayfair. According to what we know, Blake and Ryan are the driving force behind the threats, manipulation, and chaos. And they know what's coming. They know those recorded calls with WME exist. They know the depositions from agents like Danny Greenberg detail alleged threats, coercion, and pressure tactics. They know there's audio involving Sony about the premiere. They know these materials show exactly what was happening behind closed doors. And regarding the long-repeated accusation that Justin is some kind of predator, according to the case details, the only basis Ryan seems to have is Justin's own reflections in his book about youthful moments where he didn't understand consent the way we define it today. Back then, people didn't explicitly ask before holding hands or going in for a kiss. Does that make him a criminal? According to the filings, no. And ironically, the only person who has publicly admitted to groping someone on set is Ryan himself during filming of The Change-Up with Olivia Wilde, something he openly discussed in an interview. There have also been other scattered accusations around him online over the years. Meanwhile, WME has its own history of harassment and discrimination claims, lawsuits, and scandals stretching back years, even involving WME litigation and former employees. Ari Emanuel has since moved to a different division, and insiders say there have been consequences behind the scenes since all of this surfaced, even if the public hasn't seen it directly. Career-wise, Ryan has taken streaming deals with Amazon and Netflix, but has not been attached to a major theatrical lead for years, aside from an upcoming animated film. Multiple pitches to Disney and Marvel reportedly went nowhere. Blake hasn't signed on to a major theatrical project either, only a streaming film that may never be produced. So yes, there have been real-world professional consequences, and that may be part of why Blake and Ryan are refusing to let this go. But at the same time, the evidence is already in Wayfair's hands. The recordings exist, Sony and WME have turned over material, and unfortunately, Wayfair can't legally sue Sony for how badly the situation was mishandled, or how they allowed the project to spin out of the creator's control. Wayfair financed everything, roughly $30 million, and yet somehow Blake and Ryan became the public face of the entire production. In what other industry could someone take full creative control of a project they didn't pay for? So that's where we are. Multiple recorded calls, deposition testimony, communications, and sealed documents that will eventually come to light. What do you think will be in those recordings? What's your take on Blake and Ryan's attempt to seal everything? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss new updates. Thanks for watching, besties. Bye!